Hey, Ari, I see you've gotten way ahead of me. What have you found on this car so far?
All right, so we got the car here on the lift, and of course the first thing I decided to do was just pull the wheels off to inspect the brakes and see how everything was looking. And the first problem right away, somebody way over torqued the wheels. I had to use a 3/4 inch impact on full power, and we're talking almost 150 pounds to get the lug bolts off. So that was the first problem I found. Now, once I did get the wheels off, I was really pleasantly surprised that the brake rotors look like they're in good shape. A lot of the suspension and the steering components are pretty good. So, you know, some of them have been recently replaced, and it's actually, you know, somebody has tried to put some love into this car, but there's some other things that I've noticed are really lacking, and a couple that are a little sketchy. The car's kind of been butchered and put together and, you know, not exactly the proper way on everything. So I'd like to take you guys around now and show you a few examples of what we've been finding. Now here we are on the driver's side, and you know, I just wanted to look things over and see how everything was looking, and the first thing that jumps out is look at this big rub mark here. It's really strange, and as it turns out, somebody put the wrong wheels on this car, and it was actually, the wheel was rubbing along the brake caliper here. And you notice up here on the shock absorber also, the tire has been rubbing and caused some wear on the shock body. So those are just a couple more examples of somebody trying to work on this car and not really putting it together correctly. Now here we are looking underneath the engine, and I was actually really happy. There's not too much oil leaking here. There's some wetness, but there's no profuse oil leaks dripping down. And now here's the biggest problem I found so far. Was somebody, you see these hard lines have been cut, and somebody bonded them with a piece of rubber hose. Now these are for the oil cooler line, so there's this one here and this one up here, and I notice it's really soft. This is very unsafe, and it could be a culprit of why this transmission might be having trouble now. If one of these hoses were to break off and you lose your transmission fluid, almost, you know, within a minute, you're going to do serious damage inside the transmission. Now, the next thing is coming back. You know, I was just looking around, and this is really weird. The neutral safety switch for the transmission has been moved, and the switch lever here is disconnected. Now, we can't say for sure how this is affecting the transmission, but just goes to show another example of somebody was trying to do some kind of repair here and didn't quite finish the job. And here's the next thing on my inspection list, was just to check out the rear end. And the first thing is I was looking at the trailing arms. I don't know if you can see, but this one especially is loose enough to move by hand. Now, they aren't terrible. You can come in here, and most of them feel pretty solid, so that's not really a deciding factor, just another thing to look at. Now, I am really happy about these. The axles look really nice, they feel good, the boots aren't ripped, and for those other 190E enthusiasts out there, you might know that these are the same axles that will fit in a 190E 2.3 16 valve, no longer made by Mercedes, so that's some treasure there. And coming across, this differential has definitely been leaking for some time. Lots of grease buildup and just looks really dirty, but the flex disc looks good. It may have been replaced at one point. There's some minor cracks, but no real problems there. The e-brake cables, another thing, just, you know, no cracking. They're dirty, but they seem to be in good shape. And, you know, what can you say about the exhaust? It's a little patched together. It's been welded at least a few times to try to stop the exhaust leaks. So, for the most part, everything looks like it's okay. Just wear and tear, and somebody has at least tried to do some maintenance on this car. Looking back at the engine, I just wanted to put a little more emphasis on the lack of oil leaks on this engine. Around the transmission bell housing, you see some wetness, but it looks like really probably just from the transmission leaking a little. When you look inside this cover here, looking into the flex disc, area, it's really dry in there, which indicates that the rear main seal on the engine has not been leaking, and that's a big plus. And now moving forward, you see a bit more wetness, and definitely on the oil pan there's been a little more considerable oil leak here. But if you look close, most of the wetness is coming at least from around the area around this sensor. And that's first of all, a really easy thing to fix, a common leak area. So that's one thing that I think could be solved on this engine.
Okay, what's the verdict?
Okay, so after looking this thing over, I was focusing on the three main points that a lot of you have probably heard Kent say before. And that is the body and exterior, the interior, and mechanical. Now, on this car, the exterior definitely fails. It's got some serious dents. It's been repainted. It's, doesn't look pretty at all. So that's a fail there. The next one we looked at was interior. And the interior has some nice parts, and the seats are actually in pretty nice shape. But there's been some weird stuff added. There's an aftermarket alarm system, an aftermarket radio, and things not working. So overall, you could maybe give the interior a half mark on that. So the last one is mechanical, and that is definitely a fail on this car. I showed you guys where the wheels were rubbing, and we've got some suspension issues. The transmission is no question not even worth trying to save it. So I think, unfortunately, we're gonna have to let this car be a donor. But the good news is it's gonna save some other Mercedes from falling into the same fate. And the really good news, for me anyway, is there's a lot of good parts on this car that I'll be able to use on other projects of my own. So I think the way to wrap this all up, and you've heard Ken say this before too, is there is nothing more expensive than a cheap Mercedes, and this is a grade A example of that right here. So there's only one more thing I really wanted to say before I end this video. Hi, Mom!